We're all gathered around this group of nettles. What a fun place to gather around, right? This tree's kind of crowded me in here, so I'm just going to stand real close. King Sting, king of the ring. Look how tall it gets. Boy, this one will get really tall. It'll get so tall. It'll get so tall and stingy that it starts to fall back down again. And then when it does, this is a really good way of working with nettle if you're interested in planting it, is just kind of push it down and all these little nettles, stalklets will come back up. So King Sting, one of my ultimate favorite plants, maybe one of my first plant allies too. So why? Well, because it's a badass, that's why. Look at this plant. Look at it just like looks mean and badass. It's got this edgy, deep lobed, like not deep lobed, but it's just like lobed and like sharp. And it kind of gives off this vibe of like, don't approach me unless we're friends. Because it's green and because it's like, it's been eaten by the bugs, and so it seems like to be nutritive and stuff, right? But upon closer look, you'll start to be like, I don't know if I should go over there. And if you don't know this plant, then it will introduce itself to you. In fact, this is the only plant that you could properly identify at midnight on the new moon. Why? Because it's stingers. And this is the awareness medicine of this plant. It's really medicinal in a lot of ways. Let's talk about the awareness aspect of it first. It tells you, hi, how's it going? I'm Nettle. Pleased to meet you. Hey, you're not paying attention to me. Hey, and it'll just get you. It'll say, hey, buddy, you're not walking or not watching where you're going. Hey, don't step there. Don't step there. Okay, I had to tell you. I had to warn you. And the later it gets in the year, like right now, it's not so stingy. I don't know. Maybe it just like brushes against itself a whole bunch of times, and deer walk by and stuff like that. But this plant doesn't have that much stingers on it. In fact, I can barely see any. There's some on the undersides of the leaves. In the springtime, though, this plant is really, really stingy. So the first medicinal use of this plant I'll talk about is its sting. Now, back in time, the Romans used to use the therapy of this plant, the sting of it. They called it urtication, and that's named after the plant itself. Urtica dioica is the genus and the botanical name. Urtica dioica means the two house of the stinger, or urtication means like itch and sting. So they did this therapy called urtication. And it's funny because I don't normally open up with talk about nettle as like its sting as being therapeutic. Usually that's a turnoff. Usually when you talk about a plant, you want to be like, oh, it's a really gentle and helpful plant, and there's all these ways, but watch out at the end. And here I am being like, hey, you know what you could do with this plant? You could go sting yourself. Hey, buddy, why don't you go take a hike and sting yourself with some nettle? That's the answer to your troubles. But that could be the answer to your troubles, especially if your troubles are the things that the sting elicits, or the response that the sting elicits. So when you get stung by a nettle, what happens? You get a lot of little tiny blisters or urtications. You get they get red. They get infused with all of the venom that's in this plant. Some people thought it used to be formic acid, which in bee stings, but it's not. It's like a little bit of formic acid, maybe 2%, but it's a lot of other stuff. Plants or compounds, medicinal compounds that have not actually been identified. But one of them is serotonin. So what happens is that it stings the area of your body, and just like we were talking about with the back in the yarrow video, or up in the yarrow video, where we're talking about like the body having habits and developing habits. Well, if that habit is like a long, deep term, chronic coldness that's stuck, so a pattern that's been down there for a long time, it's not shooting and burning pain. It's not like super hot like pain. It's like deep down, like, oh man, my tendons are sore, my back is really sore. It's like achy, like, and you point to it, where in your back? It's just like my whole back, man, or just like my whole lower back. That's a great indication for that cold. That's how we would describe like the cold action, stagnation, lack of vitality, and tension. So this plant, the urtication, the sting of this plant is directly indicated for warming, because those little urtication bubbles are warming those tissues up, and it's bringing energy to that area, and it's saying, no, you can't ignore it anymore. You have to go there. You have to go down into those deep areas where you've been neglecting and bring in pro-inflammatories and histamines and antihistamines and anti-inflammatories and get down into those areas and clean it out again. And let that chronic inflammation that's deep down come up to the surface and rise out. And then if that is a matter of tension, like there's just too much tension, then having something like this that just like snaps that tension, the sting, it's just like, woo, it's a shock. And it's like, it snaps that tension away. And the other indication that this would be used for would be like too much dampness, because those blisters elicit like like little dampness, so it's kind of going down into the joints or to the areas of the chronic pain and bringing up some stagnant dampness. So back in the Roman days, you know, you got your Roman soldiers, they're walking, all roads lead to Rome, all roads lead away, hiking, marching. They got their skirts on and their spears and their little mohawk helmets, and they look like the Mars character guy. And they're just centuries marching, trying to find a plot of land. Everywhere they go, they would carry nettle seeds for their nutritional value, but also to plant with them, so that by the time they got to where they went, they could take a stalk of nettle. Aha, we're 600 cubic kilometers, or whatever measurement they used in Rome, away from Rome, and here we are, we found some nettle. And they would sting themselves, shoot, on their legs, right underneath their skirts or whatever. Manly skirts, Roman skirts, you know. And they would sting them, and that would take away that swelling. It would bring up any of that deep pain up to the surface and let it go. So I like to think of the sting of nettles as also being a way of defragmenting the nervous system in general. So, not just for stagnant pain, like in the springtime when you sting yourself with a nettle sting from that stagnant winter stuckness, but also to like re-establish the nervous system connection throughout the body. This is a great way of reintroducing that, you know, like because like I said, it has serotonin in it. I like to think that it does have a way of like reconnecting nervous points of nervous system, things that have been dulled in a etheric or spiritual way as well, where you feel just like not turned on by the joys of life, or just not joyful anymore. And what would something that would give you joy be? It would be like the rush of like jumping out of a plane and an you know, you have a parachute. You're like, woo, that was awesome. Yes, I feel so alive. I haven't felt this alive in years. Or you could do the same thing with nettle. You don't have to go up into a plane or anything. You could just do it. It's like a mini airplane jump where you're like, I don't know if I could do this, but I'm prepared because I've made the choice in my head to like defragment all of the deep down stuck damp trauma that's somewhere in my emotional field that's not allowing my nerves to connect, not allowing the serotonin and the dopamine to register from my head to the gut as it normally does and outwards to the periphery. And I just feel like, okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3. I did it on 2. Oh, woo, woo, woo. Okay, I feel better. I feel good. It's just like, wow, that was crazy. It was a little rush. So that's a really great way of using the sting of nettle for the nervous system in general. Like I said, I don't normally open with that because a lot of times when somebody comes to me and they're like, hey, buddy, I got pain in my knees, or I got pain in my lower back. What do you got for that? Normally I'll be like, well, we have this salve, or we have these types of things, or what kind of pain? Let's talk about that. It's not the first thing I'll be is like, take a hike, go out into the woods, get lost, and sting yourself with some nettle, because then they'll probably be like, what a jerk. But really, it's good advice. Let's get down to the things that people normally talk about nettle for, which is this plant is highly nutritive, super nutritive. It's one of the highest, most superfoods that you could find. You know, way like 400 times more calcium than spinach, 20 times more manganese and potassium and all these things than, you know, your superfoods that they sell at the grocery store, like blueberries and stuff like that. So this is a great alternative because it provides so much nutrition to our body. In addition, to defragmenting with the sting, it also defragments the inner part of the interstitial fluid in the cells. So if you have your cell and you have another cell and they're trying to communicate to each other, there's a bunch of fluid around them. Sometimes they're really close to each other. There's a little bit of like mortar in between the bricks, I guess you could say. And that space that's in between it is a fluid space, and sometimes it just gets gunked up. It's like a shared hallway. It's like where you have a shared hallway, and sometimes your neighbors will keep that shared hallway clean, and sometimes they'll just start putting up all their gunk, their stroller, their canoe, their skis, the hose, everything. They'll just start putting it up, and you're just like trying to walk to your house, and you're walking through that. Or like I like to say, it's like there's messages from this cell to this cell are trying to say it's like a post office, and the person is trying to put postage. It's a postal worker. He's trying to put postage in the mailboxes of all of the PO boxes in the back scenes of the post office, right? And in order to do that, he's got to walk through 3 feet of guacamole and 1 foot of mascarpone cheese. So it's just like really hard to communicate or to get work done when all of that shared space, that interstitial fluid, is just like gunked up with excess junk. And that stuff sometimes gets stored there because it's wintertime and we just don't want to deal with it, just like in the case of the neighbors. And sometimes it's just like excess metabolites. And what Nettle does is it goes into that intercellular fluid and it looks at all the little pieces and parts and it starts to defragment them and pull them apart and say, oh, it looks at them like Legos. It's like, oh, here's a block that I could use for like this little protein over here. Oh, here's a block I could use for oh, it's like a headlight block. Oh, sweet. I need that for like the car I'm building. And so it takes all these little like protein Legos and it distributes them other places. And by that, it like drains that intercellular fluid. And it does so by working on the kidney. This plant is really high in boron and boric acid, which is it's a stimulating diaphoretic to the kidneys through its nourishment process, not through its aggravation process. So, kidney nourisher, it dries, it drains, it pulls up proteinaceous waste. Sometimes that looks like excess mucus. Sometimes that looks like gout and other forms of like excess dampness in the body. So that's why this plant is a great plant for the allergies, because allergies could be a reaction sometimes to just like an overreaction. Being stuck in a feedback loop, almost like a fight or flight response of the allergic system as well, and recognizing all of this metabolites and proteinaceous waste and not making use of it. So what Nettles do is that it helps improve the viscosity of mucus and dries it up. So because of that, this plant can be really drying. For the Vatas or the dry people or the people who have a drier constitution, Nettles can be really, really too drying. So it's nice to add a little bit of marshmallow or something moistening to your Nettle infusion. That's a great way of using Nettle, by the way, is making a nutritive infusion. Taking a bunch of the Nettle leaf that's dried, putting it in a pot of water, handful, an ounce, whatever, depends on who you're listening to, and covering it with boiling water and letting it sit for an hour or 2 hours overnight and letting it get really, really forest milk. It turns into like this green forest milk. It's so dense and yummy. And sometimes there's even like a tiny little slick of oils on the top. And I don't think it's because this plant is oily. I think it just changes a lot of things in the when you're boiling it for so long, or not boiling it, but when it's been sitting there for so long. And that's what it's going to do in the body too. It's going to alter our digestion, not in the uptake, and not maybe in the uptake a little bit, but certainly in the elimination of it. So a great plant to work with if you're working with your lymphatic system, or if you're working with your kidneys. Certainly many hours could be spent talking about the nutritive virtues of this plant. So I'll end it at that. But one of the things that I love about this plant is the stalk and how that could be utilized in a utilitarian fashion, not for medicine per se, but for textiles. This is a plant that has been broken down and used for cordage. It's really, really nice cordage, or for fabric. So I went, if you ever been to like in European like World War museums or something like that, you'll find World War II uniform. It's made out of cotton and it's all like falling apart and eaten in holes, and there's all kinds of, it looks like this leaf. And then you'll find the World War I uniforms, and they were made with nettles and hemp, and they're in perfect condition because the fibers of the nettles and the fibers of hemp as well are extremely long-lasting and great materials for constructing textiles with, ropes and cordage. So the first zine I ever made, I took the painstaking process of making some nettle cordage with, and then I bound the zine in the nettle cordage, and it was my hands were like burning on fire afterwards. That's a really great. That was a great feeling, but I didn't. I think I sold like 2 or 3 of them. I was like, okay, I'm never going to do this again. But I have another funny nettle story too, and that is, speaking of Europe, when I was on tour with my band, it was back in, I don't remember, 2013, 2014, something like that. And so we're on tour with our band, and my fiance at the time, who's my wife now, is Italian. She's living in Italy, and so we're going to go from Italy. We're going to go up to Switzerland, Germany, come back around, meet in Italy, and then we're going to have our Italian wedding ceremony, and then we're going to do that before she comes to the United States and have the United States ceremony. So she gives me a kiss goodbye. We go to Switzerland. I don't know what happened that night. Too much Switzerland fun. But the next thing I know, I wake up in the morning and I got 2 black eyes. My friends told me that I was walking up the stairs and like punched my head through, like I tripped on the stairs and punched my head up the stairs through the wall. They're like, that hole's from your head. I'm like, oh, I could tell. My glasses were broken, and it was just a mess. I was a mess. And I'm looking at myself and I'm like, oh my gosh, my eyes, they're like swollen and they're black, and I'm getting married in a few days. Like, I gotta fix this. So it was kind of like a penance in a way. It was like in a certain way, it was like a penance or like pause for a second here. As this man walks by. Okay, so we get in the van and we go to Germany, and I'm like, oh, my head. And the first thing I saw in Germany was like some nettles, and I'm like, oh, sweet, my old familiar friend. And this is a great, awesome thing about when you learn plants and you can see them in other parts of the world. You're like, I know you. You're my friend. I know what you're good for. And then I was like, here's what you're good for. I'm gonna take you, and I'm gonna be like, I was such a bad person. I'm never gonna be like that before. So I started stinging myself in the face, like, ow, ow, ow. And the nettle in Germany was so stingy. And so and the other thing too is, like, in Germany, most people, if you've been to Germany, you'll know that you have to like pay €1 to go to the bathroom at the rest stops and the gas stations. I'm like, I'm an American. I'm not gonna pay $1 to pee. I'm gonna go around the back. And so I go around the back and I'm peeing out there in the back with the other Americans, and and I'm like, oh, cool, there's some nettles. And so that was the thing. I would just like stop at all the gas stations in Germany, and I would just be like, I'm gonna go find some nettles. They're like, yeah, right, cheapskate. I'm like, I am. And so I get some, and I come back to the van, and I'd be like, ow, ow. And the other bandmates are like, you okay, dude? I'm like, look, man, it's only gonna take a couple more days of this, and this black eye will be gone. And sure enough, get back to Italy. Pictures looked great. Family loved me. Everyone's happily ever after. We fell in love, right? She married me. That's the spoiler alert. So you can use nettles to move away stagnant blood, stagnant bruising, soreness, aching, wounds from puncturing your head through a wall in Switzerland, penance for your sin, forgive me, I'll never do it again. Bringing back online your nervous system, and reestablishing joy, and then also the nutritive aspects of it. And then just knowing that it's a a familiar friend that's going to grow all around the world. It grows in areas that it likes to be kind of on the edge of the woodside or by the river or by the Milwaukee River right now. It likes to break down metabolites by rushing waters, and that's a signature that it's working in with the waters of your body. And we can, and just like penance and just, feeling the familiarity of a superfood, comforting friend that you might want to avoid. But if you approach with reverence and respect, a lot of times you could just stand there and hang out with it in the same way that you might have a friend that's just like, hey buddy, nice to see you, and punches you in the arm, and you're like, nice to see you too. And that's how I like to approach this plant, with reverence and confidence. Because if you're not confident and you don't have that awareness, it will tell you. It'll say, hey, I'm the king around here. But if you're like, hey, can I share this space with you? I'm also your friend. Then normally you can do so, and it just doesn't bother you that much. It's kind of like I like to think of it in the same way that, like, if you approach a dog, if you see a dog on the street and like, hey, who's a good dog? Who's a good dog? Who's a friendly dog? Then the dog will respond to you. But if you're like, oh, I don't know about that dog, then the dog is like, I don't know about that person, and it senses your fear. I don't know if this plant does that, but there's something that happens in a reaction when you engage with something as electric, that stores the electricity from the ground and delivers it outwards into its leaf, into your body, and transmits that electrical shock again. There's something that happens when you change the charge of your body and your intention with familiarity and love and kindness and respect and honor, as the awareness medicine of Nettle cultivates in us. And as we walk through the paths of life, we can remember that lesson, not even taking it, but just by remembering Nettles and the other things that we interact with. There's Nettles for you. Okay, so maybe you don't want to get stung. Maybe you're like, oh, I got stung and that sucks, and I really want it to go away. So they say the cure for the sting lives by the nettles, and we have a couple of versions here. We got some jewelweed, which is a great one, probably the best one actually, because you just take a little bit of jewelweed and you just kind of crush it up like that. And then after a couple of seconds, you really get a lot of juice out of the jewelweed. So you can put the jewelweed juice on, and jewelweed is astringent and cooling, and it just takes wounds that are swollen and red, like a sting, and it flattens them out, cools them off, dries them up. So jewelweed's one. Here's another one, right down here. We got burdock, and burdock, the leaf of burdock, is one of the things that actually sometimes I'll use to harvest nettle, and I'll make like a little glove out of it. But I'll use the midrib of the burdock and just make a little, just like take it off like you're taking the midrib off of kale or something like that. And just kind of crush it up, and it gets kind of juicy as well, and you can rub that on it. So there's another. And then the third is the nettle itself. What? Yeah, totally. You can take a leaf of it, and a lot of times in the earlier part of the year, there'll be some spikies on the bottom of the leaf. It'll be more stingy, but in the later part of the year, they're not so much. So I usually kind of crush it upon itself a few times, and then I'll chew it and get the juices, and now I got a spit poultice, just like all the other spit poultices we make. It kind of looks the same. It's just a green mushy blob of sting cure. So the nettle itself is the cure for the sting. Yeah.